Hello class, today we're going to be going over the Civil War. So for today we're going to do just a brief overview of the Civil War. Not going to go too in depth, but we're also not going to stay too broad. So one of the main things that I want to point out here first is that the Civil War happened between 1861 and 1865. So that was quite a long time ago, so like I said, that's why we're going to go a little bit more on just an overview standpoint, and we're not going to get too in depth, but we're also not going to stay too broad either. So the agenda for today, I already introduced the lesson, so that point number one is already taken care of. Number two, we're going to go over the importance of the Civil War, what it meant back then. We're going to do some fast facts of the Civil War. We're going to get it a little bit more interesting. We're not going to just have a lecture that has no interesting facts about the Civil War, even though it's all interesting. Civil War who's who. So this is going to bring up significant factors and significant people of the Civil War and what they did and who they were. We're going to do just a quick recap at the end of the lesson, just to go over everything that we've already went over, just to make sure that everybody's on the same page. And then we'll do a quick Google form or a quick quiz at the end. It's going to be 8 to 10 questions. It's not going to be super long. It's not going to be super intensive. And it's going to be pretty much just for evaluation purposes, just to see what you know at the end of this lesson, see what we need to go a little bit more in depth in, see what we covered pretty well. So to start, what exactly was the Civil War? Well, despite what many people think, there can be many answers to this. Like I just said, there can be many possible correct answers to the question that I posed. For example, one of the answers could be something as simple as a war fought in the United States, or America at this time. That would be a correct and suffice or sufficient answer to the question. A more in-depth answer would be something like a war that divided the country between the Union and the Confederacy, or the Confederate States of America. This is also an example of a suffice and correct answer. Lastly, if you really wanted to go in depth, an answer would be like a war in the mid to late 19th century that was fought between the Union and the outlying states that seceded from the Union to create the Confederate States of America over the status of slavery. All three of those answers are suffice answers, and these may not be the only answers that you guys can give out. There's a number of different answers that would be sufficient for this question. So this would be the time where I would ask for you guys to give me an example. Since I just gave 3 or 4 examples, I'm not going to ask for examples today, but this would be where I would ask for those examples. So why? Why the Civil War, and what was important about the Civil War? What made it such an important battle to fight? So again, just like the last slide, there are many small possible answers for this question. For example, a smaller possible answer would be that it ended slavery, and it showed states something that they didn't see before. It showed them that they couldn't, it showed the Confederate States that they couldn't do this on their own, that they had to unionize with the rest of the states in America in order to succeed as a country. So both of these are smaller answers surrounding a big theme. And what are other major theme options? So one big theme from this is that it preserved the Union. It preserved the United States by outlawing slavery, by completely ending slavery, or at least that was the thought at the time. That's the big theme, preservation here. It preserved the Union. It preserved everything that America stood for, or everything that America was supposed to stand for at the time. So some fast facts. 1, the Union Army was double the size of the Confederate Army. At the time, the Union Army was 1,064,000 soldiers, while the the Confederate Army was 1,064,000 soldiers, and the Union Army was just over 2,100,000. So the Union Army was easily larger and outmanned the Confederate Army. 2. The Civil War was the deadliest war in American history. This is still true and rings true today. So there was 210,000 soldiers that were killed. Just plain out soldiers, people that were fighting in the war, 210,000 were killed. As a whole, there were 625,000 total casualties. This includes everything from the 210,000 soldiers to just civilians, just anybody that wasn't supposed to die during the war that did. So 625,000 total casualties, 210,000 of those were from soldiers. Only 1 in 4 Southern farmers owned slaves. So I think that this is really interesting because the main reason that the war was fought was over slavery, was over the emancipation of slaves that the South didn't agree with. But only 1 in 4 of those Southern farmers owned slaves. So that shows that every one of those Southern farmers was rich and owned a whole lot of slaves. And that's the main point here, is that a lot of the people in the South that owned slaves at the time were rich, and they owned a majority of the slaves. 4, 60% of the deaths were from 60% of the deaths from the war did not come from battle. So to put that into perspective, only 40%, so just under half of those 625,000 deaths did not come from gunshot wounds and did not come from stuff like that. It came from disease. It came from stuff that could have happened post-war or post-battle. So a gunshot wound that gets infected, that person ultimately doesn't die from being shot. They die from dysentery and stuff like that. So who's who of the Civil War? So I'm going to pull up 5 pictures of important figures from the Civil War. So the first one is Abraham Lincoln. He was the 16th president of the United States, and he was the main proprietor of this Civil War. He called for the emancipation of the slaves, which was documented as the Emancipation Proclamation, and said that all the slaves are free. And he was a preserver. He wanted to preserve the Union. He was on the side of the Union, and he wanted to preserve the whole United States. So next is Nathan Bedford Forrest. He was one of the greatest U.S. cavalrymen that the United States has ever seen, even up to the present day. He permitted one of the largest and most important Civil War massacres that ever took place. And this is one of the even most important massacres that has ever taken place in any American war. Next, we have Robert E. Lee, who is a Confederate general. He was a commander and the commander-in-chief towards the end of the war for the Confederate States of America. And he was known for being a military tactician. Towards the end of the war for the Confederacy, he had many major victories for them towards the end that almost pushed them to a victory in the war as a whole. So next we have Ulysses S. Grant. He was the 18th president of the United States. This came after the war, and he was a U.S. general for the longest time. He was the commander of the Union Army during the later years, during the last 2 years of the war. He was the commander. And just a quick interesting fact about him is that he pushed Mark Twain to write some of his best books, Huckleberry Finn, stuff like that. He pushed Mark Twain to publish those books. So he wasn't just a president, and wasn't just a Civil War hero. And then lastly, we have Clara Barton. I think that it's very important to put in women figures here. So Clara Barton was an educator, so she taught during this time, She was a battlefield nurse, and she was her nickname was Angel of the Battlefield for all the lives that she saved. And then she was also a founder. She founded, after the war, the American branch of Red Cross. So she founded the American Red Cross. So just a quick recap. The war was, sorry. So I'm just going to do a quick recap here without the slide. The war was from 1861 to 1864. So it lasted 4 years. It was between the Confederacy and the Union over slavery. So that's what the war was. 625,000 total deaths is what the death total was for the war. 210,000 of those, again, came from soldiers, and the rest came from disease and stuff like that. It involved 2 American presidents. It involved one current American president in Abraham Lincoln, and then involved one future American president in Ulysses S. Grant. And then, like I stated at the beginning, it was a 4-year war. From 1861 to 1865 is how long it lasted. So now it's quiz time. Just a little precursor. I don't want you to worry about this quiz. I do want you to push yourself to do your best by, just paying attention during this PowerPoint and during this lesson. But I don't want you to worry about it. It's not going to be super extensive. It's not going to be hard. And I want you to take your time. I don't want you to rush through this just because it's a quick quiz at the end of a lesson. I want you to, like I said, I want you to push yourself to do your best. This is for reflections. It's going to be graded on participation basis and how well that you actually tried. If you get a 0 out of 10, I'm going to assume that you didn't really try and you just brushed through those questions. But if I can tell that you tried, you're gonna get a good grade just because it's based on reflections. And then lastly, good luck. I want you to do your best on this just because I want you to pay attention to things that are important during the past that have shaped our future. So the link for it is going to be listed down here. You can type that or copy and paste that from the lesson into your browser and take the quiz. And like I said, just good luck.